Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to our Kabbalat Shabbat Friday evening service. We are delighted to have you joining us on live stream, and we are especially excited to have Jeff Abrams of the ADL joining us this evening at the end of our service to give a presentation on the state of the alarming rise in antisemitism, not only in Los Angeles, but as we know, around the world. So we'll be welcoming him into our service later this evening. I want to just take a moment to talk a little bit about this Shabbat, and of course, missing my clergy partners, Rabbi Camrus and David Helfand. So this is Shabbat Nachamu, as many of you know. It's also Parshat V'Chanan, but Shabbat Nachamu is the Shabbat of comfort after Tisha B'Av, which we commemorated as a community last weekend. And the beginning of the Haftarah portion tomorrow is Nachamu Nachamu Ami, comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. It is the first of 7 Haftarot of consolation after Tisha B'Av that lead us to Rosh Hashanah. So we have these 7 weeks of comfort. And there is a rabbi who blogs. She's called the Coffee Shop Rabbi. And she wrote a really beautiful interpretation of this Nachamu Nachamu, this line, which is a command in the plural. And she asks the question, why is this command given in the plural? Who is comforting whom? And so I encourage and invite each of you as we enter this Shabbat together to think about not only the things that bring you comfort, the people and the things that bring you comfort. And we know that in light of some of the difficulties around us, that comfort is an important thing and something that we seek in our tradition and on Shabbat. But how are the ways that you also can comfort others? What are the ways that you can provide a sense of consolation, comfort, and healing to those around you? So with those questions and those thoughts in mind, we're going to begin our evening service with a Nigun Hayadata. Yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai lai ai lai lai ai lai 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 yai lai 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 yai lai 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 ai lai 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 yai lai ai lai 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 yai lai 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 ai lai 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 yai lai ai lai 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 yai lai 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 ai ai lai 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 yai lai 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 la 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 lai lai ya la lai ya la lai ya la 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 lai lai ya la 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 lai yai lai 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 yai la la lai lai yai lai 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 la 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 lai lai ya la lai ya la lai ya la lai 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 ya la lai 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 lai. We continue in our service. We begin our Kabbalat Shabbat service actually on page 11, Lechuna Ranana, let us sing. Reminding everyone that you will be invited to join into the Zoom meeting room. I'm feeling kind of lonely, so I'm looking forward to seeing your wonderful faces and feeling your presence around the middle of the service and, of course, during Mr. Abrams' presentation. Lechuna Ranana, page 11. Let us sing together. Lechuna Ranana, Lechuna Ranana, Lechuna Ranana, Ladonai. Lechuna Ranana, Lechuna Ranana, Lechuna Ranana, Ladonai. Naria, Naria, Letsut Shenu, Nikadma Fana Vitoda. silently. أربעים שנה כות בדור ואמרם תוי לבבהם והם לא ידעו דרכי אשר נשבעתי ואבי אם יבואו נלמנו אחתי. שירו לאדוני שיר חדש. Sing to God a new song. We will begin silently and join together at the bottom of page 14, Ya'aloz Sadai. יעלוז שדי וכל אשר בו יעלוז שדי היי 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 יעלוז שדי וכל אשר בו יעלוז שדי היי 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 אז ירננו כל עצי יער אז ירננו כל עצי ישפוטיבה בצדק ועמים באמונתו. We're going to continue our Psalms silently. I encourage you to read through the Siddur and notice the beautiful imagery of nature, the created world, the sounds of the trees and the rivers exclaiming their joy, their celebration, and gratitude to God. Inviting you to pray silently. We're going to come back together in just a few moments on page 21 from Mizmor LeDavid. אור זרו על הצדיק ולשרי לב שמחה, שמחו צדיקים באדוני והודו לזכר קודשו. מזמור שיר לאדוני שיר חדש כי נבלות עצמם הריעו לאדוני כל הארץ לפני אדוני כי בא לשפוט הארץ ישפוט עבד בצדק ועמים במישרים. Page 19. אדוני מלאך ירכזו עמים יושב רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו. We are on page 21, inviting you to rise if you are able. Mizmor LeDavid. This is a Sephardic melody from Sephardic Temple, Tiferet, Israel. Those of you who are familiar with that wonderful community and who may have heard this melody. מזמור לדוד, הבו לאדוני בני אלים, הבו לאדוני כבוד ועוז, הבו לאדוני כבוד שמו השתחוו לאדוני בהדרת קודש. כל אדוני על המים אל הכבוד הרים, אדוני על מים רבים, כל אדוני בכוח, כל אדוני בהדר, כל אדוני שובר ארזים, משבר אדוני את ארזי הלבנון, וירקידם כמו עגל לבנון וסיריון, כמו בן רעמים, כל אדוני חוצב להבות אש, כל אדוני יכיל מדבר, יכיל אדוני מדבר קדש, כל אדוני חולל איילות
אדוני מלך לעולם, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. היי, יאי לה 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 לה, יאי לה לה לה, יאי לה 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 לה, יאי לה 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 לה, יאי לה לה לה, יאי לה 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 לה, יאי לה 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 לה, יאי לה 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 לה.
You may be seated. We're going to turn now to Lecha Dodi, this beautiful mystical prayer poem about welcoming the Shabbat bride, about teaching us to, speaking of love, which we're going to speak about in a little bit because tonight begins Tu B'Av, which is the Jewish holiday of love. This beautiful piyut, this beautiful poem of Lecha Dodi is all about the love between the people of Israel and Shabbat, between the people of Israel and God. So inviting you to think about that relationship and that love as we sing Lecha Dodi together. We are on page 23.
Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, ishmiyanu el hameyuchad. Adonai echad u'shmo echad, l'shemo tiferet v'li tehila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki hi mikor haberacha. Merosh mikedem nesucha, sof maaseh b'machshava tchila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Mikdash melech ir melucha, kumitzei mitoch hafecha. רב לך שבט בעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלייך חמלה. lecha Dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התנערי מעפר קומי, לבשי בגדי תפארתך עמי. על יד בן ישי בית הלחמי, קורבה אל נפשי גאלה. lecha Dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי. אורי, אורי, שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. lecha Dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לא תבושי ולא תכרמי, מה תשתוכחי ומה תמי. בך יחסו עניי עמי, ונבנתה עיר על תילה. lecha Dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. והיו למשיסה שוסייך, ורחקו כל מבלייך. יסיס עלייך אלוהייך, כמשוש חתם
rise and we face the entrance to whatever prayer space we are in as we symbolically welcome the Shabbat bride into our midst.
בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת מקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
You may be seated. We're turning now to Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, the Psalm of Shabbat, this beautiful psalm that we chant together, and we're going to join together in the middle of page 27, Ma Gadlu Ma'asecha Adonai. How wonderful are your works, God. Once again, noting the beautiful world around us, the beautiful created world, nature, and if you have a view of outside, which I do through this window, hope you'll just take a moment to appreciate the beauty that surrounds us always. Ma Gadlu. This is a melody by Nava Tehila.
מה גדלו מעשיך, אדוני, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. עוד ינובו בשיבה דשנים ונעננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי ולא עוולת בו.
Page 29.
אדוני מלך גאות לבש עדותיך נמנו מאוד לביתך נאווה קודש, אדוני לאורך ימים.
All those in mourning or observing a yard site, please rise. The mourner's Kaddish is on page 30. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. ואמרו amen. At this time, as we turn to our Mariv service, our evening service, I will share the screen and invite our dear Shomrei Torah Synagogue community to please join me in the meeting room, and all guests, of course, who are watching the service, more than welcome. And of course, Mr. Abrams, we also will welcome you whenever you join in. So we now, once again, we've opened the Zoom room. Here is the meeting ID, 874-0901-2932. The passcode is Shabbat with a capital S. I'm going to leave this up for just a little bit and invite you to join me in this meeting room so that we can enjoy each other's company and bring in Shabbat together. We turn now to page 39 for the Baruch Hu in just a moment. Page 39, please rise for Baruch Hu. You may be seated. Baruch atah
ומעביר יום ומעביר לילה, מבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המריב ערבים.
We're going to turn now to page 40. I will share the screen once again. In just a little bit, I want to welcome everybody into the Zoom meeting room. And just to let you know, we've enhanced just a few of the security features this evening, just because of the content of the topic, and just want to be extra protective. So no participant is able to unmute themselves for the duration, but we will allow people during Q&A at the end, of course, will unmute. The hosts and co-hosts will unmute, so sorry about that. And also the chat feature is limited. So, but we are so happy to have you and so happy to have your presence here. Welcome. And as people are coming into the Zoom room, I just want to say a quick word about Tu B'Av. So many of you know that this is tonight is the evening of Tu B'Av, which is the Shabbat of love. And in modern Israel, it's basically the Jewish version of Valentine's Day. And however, it has some very interesting origins. Tu B'Av, the Talmudic sages say that it was celebrated in ancient times. It was a time that single women would dress in white and go out into the field and dance in the vineyards and choose a mate. So it's an auspicious time for choosing a mate. There's also some stories, some legends that the tribes of Israel were allowed to intermingle and intermarry at these times, the different tribes of Israel, because apparently there was some tension between some of the tribes, but this was a time of openness and let's all be unified and love. So something also really interesting to note is that Tu B'Av, like Pesach, like Sukkot, like Tu B'Shvat, begins on the night between the 14th and 15th day of the month, in this case, the month of Av. And that's because this is a night of the full moon on our calendar. So a full moon, romance, it's a special time. So with that, we're going to continue with Ahavat Olam on page 40, which is one of our beautiful prayers in our liturgy about God's love. And it's the timeless nature of that love and the relationship between our people. And this poem, which its counterpart is Ahava Rabbah on Shabbat morning, it teaches us, my interpretation is that if we have this unbounding love from God that's coming to us, flowing to us at all times, how much more so are we capable, filled with that love, to share it with others? We always have that love within us. So inviting you to think about this holiday and about this prayer as we join together for Ahavat Olam on page 40.
Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot, Chukim u'mishpatim, Otanu limadeta. Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta, Ahavat Olam. Al ken Adonai Eloheinu b'shochveinu ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot, Chukim u'mishpatim, Otanu limadeta. Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta, Ahavat Olam.
We prepare to recite Shema Ve'ahavta, Parashat Ve'etchanan, which we chant this Shabbat, is where Moses introduces Shema and Ve'ahavta to our people. So remembering this ancient and central call of our people, Shema is on page 41.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך ושמעת תשמעת את השם. ויאמר אדוני משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל. Adonai Elohechem emet.
Page 43, continuing silently.
V'emuna kusot.
We will join together on page 44, Mi Chamocha, which we will sing to the melody of Erev Shel Shoshanim. Why? Because Erev Shel Shoshanim is a love song, a wedding song, an Israeli wedding song, and this is Tu B'Av. So here we go.
Mi Chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osef eleh, nora tehilot osef מלכותך רובנך בו קיים לפני משה, זה ליאנו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כיבד אדוני את יעקב גאולו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Hashkivenu, our prayer for peace in the night, a prayer that is appropriate on every night that we recite it, but especially Shabbat Nachamu and these Shabbatot of consolation. This prayer truly provides us with comfort and consolation as we prepare ourselves to sleep.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu לשלום וחמידנו מלכנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום וחמידנו מלכנו לחיים. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום וחמידנו מלכנו לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
I'm going to share the screen one more time at this point. It's so nice to see all of you. And we'll invite everybody who's watching to please join us in the Zoom meeting room. We're going to turn to page 46. If you're able, please rise for Vishamru. In just a moment. Page 46.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. איי 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 ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, כי ששת ימים עשו השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעל מה דברה קראתי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב ימרו, אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה וימרו, amen.
Silent Amidah begins on page 47, inviting you to follow along the words of the Siddur or use the words of your own heart for this intimate and connected moment with the divine. Page 47. Inviting you to finish up your Amidah at your own pace. Those who've completed their prayers, page 54, Kaddish Shalem.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועל מה דברה קילותי וימליך מלכותי בחיי חוני ומכון וחיי תאכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי דקודשה בריחו לילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן תתקבל צלותיהון ובאותיהון דכל ישראל קודם אמרון דיבי שמי ואמרו אמן יהי שלום רבה מן שמיים וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו amen.
If you have a Kiddush cup filled with grape juice or wine, I invite you at this time to lift that cup, to rise as we join together in Kiddush, page 55.
סברי מרנן ורבנן וחבריי וחברותיי ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו ורצבנו ושבת קודשו באהבה וברצון הנחילנו זיכרון למעשה וראשית כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש זכר ליציאת מצרים כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת
L'chaim. We remain standing for Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשינו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שבונת השמיים יסדר על עצמו ושב יקרו בשמיים ממש על כן נקבל לך ככתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
Inviting you to be seated at this time. We recall all those in our community whose yard site occurs this week, the 15th of Av to the 21st of Av. Anna Birnbaum, Herman Blankstein, Ibby Blau, Benjamin Botnick, Ruth Carno, Gail Castro, Lowell Delbick, Harry Eisner, Abraham Emmer, Samuel Freeman, Barbara Gabriel, Ben Giller, Emil Grodzienski, William Henteleff, Celia Hernandez, Pearl Haytow, Sophie Hollander, Betty Kahn, Jacob Cassower, Rose Klein, Rose Colton, Erwin Lamel, Erwin Mell, Harvey Lauber, Miriam Leeds, Dora Levine, Fred Lorsch, Ida Margolis, David Matler, Pauline Mells, Arlette Penn, Marino Perez, Melvin Pevsnik, Jacob Paretsky, Pearl Rasky, Et Saphir, Harry Schatz, Hortense Schiff, Amy Schwartz, Edward Shrimsky, Evelyn Singer, Jean Somberg, Benjamin Strauss, Fanny Solkov, Mordecai Varsano, Rose Weisfeld, Rose Weiss, Mendel Zelansky, Liebel Zelansky, Fanny Swag, Yehuda Rafi. All those in mourning or observing a yard site, inviting you to rise and recite the Mourner's Kaddish, page 58. Yitkadal veyitkadash shemei rabba, Be'alma divra kirute ve'amlich malchute, B'chayachon uvyomechon v'chaye decho Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala u'vizman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya, Yitbarach ve'yishtabach ve'yitpa'ar ve'yitromam ve'yitnaseh, V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu, Le'ela min kol birchata ve'shirata, Tushbachata v'nechemata, Damiran ba'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. May the one who creates peace in the heavens bring peace to all of us, to the whole world, as we say, amen. In just a moment, it is such a great pleasure to welcome Jeff Abrams from the ADL. Just some quick announcements from our community. It's nice to see you all. Please, I have the announcements right here. Join us on the 31st. We will have 2 services going on at once. On Saturday morning, the 31st, we have our traditional service in the sanctuary. That's next Shabbat. And at the same time, we have our interactive musical Shabbat on Zoom with me. That's a week from tomorrow. Tomorrow, we have traditional services in our sanctuary, which will be live streamed the 24th. Friday night, August 6th. Please join us for Shabbat under the roof, and also my installation. I'm so excited to celebrate with you all. It'll be a service, and depending on COVID protocols, we'll see about food. So RSVP is required for that. The Social Action Drive-Through Collection in the STS parking lot is this Sunday, July 25th at 10:30 a.m. The Social Action Committee is collecting men's clothing and shoes, new and gently used luggage in working condition, and loose change for tzedakah. So please come for that, the 25th, bring what you can. And we want to also encourage members, please, if you're able to attend our morning minyan, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m., Sundays at 9 a.m. in the sanctuary. Help us make a minyan. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Jeff Abrams from the ADL, who will give us an update on the state of anti-Semitism, share some important data with us, and answer our questions about what's going on and what we can do. A little bit of background on Jeffrey Abrams. He is the regional director of ADL Los Angeles, one of the oldest anti-hate and civil rights organizations in the country. A Los Angeles native, Mr. Abrams has been an attorney and mediator for more than 25 years. He has extensive experience and long-term relationships throughout the Jewish, civic, and philanthropic communities, having served as a director and trustee of Beit Tzedek Legal Services, where, by the way, I was a summer intern in law school, Jeff, the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and the Samuel and Helene Sora Foundation, among other organizations. Mr. Abrams is the 5th regional director in ADL's over 80-year history of activism in the greater Los Angeles region. We are so honored and grateful to have you, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to note to everybody, during Jeff's presentation, please chat me your questions. At the end, we'll have time to answer those questions, and we'll also, if we have time permitting, to do a public Q&A. But please chat your questions during Mr. Abrams' presentation, and turning it over to you now. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. First and foremost, Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Yash Koach on your installation to all of you. And as you might have seen at some point when I realized I did not have my kippah on for the Shema, that's all a product of me being a strong product of the conservative movement. And not just the conservative movement, but the conservative movement in Los Angeles. And so it's really so nice to be amongst all you. I grew up at Sinai Temple where I was bar mitzvahed. I went to, I can't remember the name of it, a confirmation at the University of Judaism. I went to Camp Ramah, where just 2 weeks ago, I went on a trip with friends from there, my counselors from there, and I knew legendary families like the Camrus family. And my first trip to Israel was through the Bureau of Jewish Education. And I live on the west side, and like most people, there's the shul you belong to, and then there's the shuls you won't set foot in. I belong to multiple shuls. So my religious life is at Temple Beth Am, where my 3 sons have been bar mitzvahed, and some of my sons also spent some time at Sinai Akiba. So my way of saying to all of you, I feel so comforted to be with all of you on Shabbat Nachamu. And one of the things I want to start my remarks with tonight is I'm going to share some things that are sobering, but ultimately we all find comfort in each other. It's why we say certain prayers like the Mourner's Kaddish. My father's yahrzeit was last weekend, the 8th of Av. And obviously Erev to one of the saddest days on the Jewish calendar, but for the first time in 18 months, I was with people physically. And I was actually out of town, and I went to a local Chabad, but I found comfort in my fellow Jews. And so one of the things I want as a goal tonight, as I thank Ken or Jackie for your leadership, and Rachel, and for bringing me here tonight, is one of my goals unabashedly is for all of you to know that ADL is here for you. I am here for you. And that is something that's very important to me, and why I feel so blessed to talk to you. Because as you know, and I'm about to just share my screen, we're living in some very troubling times. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you now. At least that is certainly my goal. Just bear with me 1 second. And what I want to do is share with you a little bit about ADL, who we are. Then I also, and apologies, we'll get to it. So bear with me one time. The other thing I've learned through all of this, if you'll hopefully agree with me, is the need for joyful flexibility. So just 1 second as I bring up my screen. And what I want to do is give you some history about anti-Semitism, because what I want to do also is make sure that you have the tools to yourself be effective advocates. Because this is a responsibility right now of all of ours. So if someone would be kind enough to give me a thumbs up that they can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. All right. So as a starting place, I want to share with you a little bit about who the ADL is, because I've been the regional director for about 1 year. But my background, as Ken or Jackie shared, was as a lay leader in our community. And what I found is that many people really don't know what the ADL is, even though we've heard about it forever. ADL was founded over 100 years ago in 1913 under very similar circumstances to today: a rising tide in anti-Semitism, vandalism, harassment, being precluded from certain parts of society, culminating in violence. The hanging of an Atlanta businessman named Lito Frank, who was dragged from a jail cell, hung from a tree. And so the response was the creation of the Anti-Defamation League. And the mission from the start was dual, integrated, to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all, recognizing from the very start that the Jewish community would not be safe if others were not safe, and others could not be safe if the Jewish community was not safe. And so as our mission has never wavered, but we respond to the current challenges of the day. One of the things that we are focused on right now is civil rights. And that takes a variety of forms. It takes a form of the Jewish community, as there's various legislation across the country that marginalizes the Jewish community and other communities. So we marshal our advocacy, our partnerships. Hate crimes, hate incidents, and I'll speak more about specifically anti-Semitic incidents. ADL led the way throughout our nation to pass hate crime legislation. We responded to the times to make sure that simple crimes, a simple act of vandalism or battery, when it's meant to terrorize, is treated as such and punished as such. And we continue that work very actively. Extremism, domestic extremism has been identified by the federal government as the biggest threat to our nation's security. ADL and our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, who came in 2016, had the foresight to invest very heavily in what's our Center on Extremism. We've been sounding the alarm years before January 6th, and on January 6th and since, that Center on Extremism has been able to provide very valuable information, intelligence, and thought leadership across the government, local, state, federal, on how do we respond. And then ultimately, with all these challenges as a leading anti-hate organization, it's also so appropriate, Cantor Jackie, on Tu B'Av, because it's love, and that comes from education. And we have a variety of education programs specifically that address anti-Semitism, but also that generally address anti-bias. So the goal being that we can all live in a better society. But tonight, I'm going to focus on anti-Semitism. And what I want to do, and I'm going to teach and share some of things that are known to all of you already. But what I want to do is, again, empower you so that sometimes you need to be reminded, sometimes you need to share with both Jews who aren't as educated or knowledgeable and non-Jews alike some basic core information, such as the core about a definition of anti-Semitism. Now, that's very politicized. The IHRA definition, which has widely been adapted and ADL does support as a genuine framework. However, it's very politicized, and we don't advocate that it be a legal requirement. So for the purposes of our conversation, for the purposes of our work, we're going to use a different definition for anti-Semitism, but I think one we can all have some comfort with, because anti-Semitism is at its core a form of prejudice. It's directed towards Jews either as individuals, and some of us have felt the sting of that, or as a group. And fundamental to it are stereotypes and myths. And we're going to explore that a little bit to remind ourselves when we see things or can share with others, when they use certain phrases or symbols, why it's really fundamentally anti-Semitic. Now, the term anti-Semite also has been politicized, and we've seen it parsed through. What is a Semite? But again, when that term is used, it's derogatory. It never has any other usage. There is currently some who will use a different phrase, Jew hatred, and the amazing scholar and author Deborah Lipstadt would advocate that. Call it out for what it is, so you don't get caught into the narrative of the etymology of the word. But at its core, all anti-Semitism has certain roots. It's about Jewish power. And there are certain unique things about the prejudice of anti-Semitism. A dual loyalty. It's not just being an other, but a dual loyalty. Greed and capitalism. Deicide, killing of Christ, which ties into blood libel. And then more modern forms of Holocaust denial and anti-Zionism. These are the tropes that are used, again, well known to all of you. But they start to appear and metastasize as we're now in a different time. And so historically, just real quickly to give a root, is there's been different phases. A pre-Christian era cultural otherism, monotheism versus polytheism, different eating habits, views on intermarriage. Even that just being different still pervades a lot. Many of you may have had children or grandchildren who go to college, and someone will approach them and say, I've never met a Jew before. It's an other. And as it evolved or changed or adds dynamic, it has a theological theme during the Christian era, again, tied into deicide, this concept of evil. And so it's that Jewish, that divine punishment, something that travels through the times, and we even see continuing today. And after the Christian era, in the pre-Nazi phase, it starts to become more political. There's anti-Semites on the right and the left, just like there is today, but it takes different forms. It becomes more racial. It ties more into the economic class. And then as it evolves, and the Russian intelligence develops the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, which is one place that combines all these different conspiracies. And the conspiracy is one of the keys to the uniqueness of anti-Semitism, because it's just not you're different, you're not as good as us. It's you're trying to control us. And that protocols of the learned elders of Zion, as much as we would hope it's a relic of the past, in March of this year, on a Sunday evening, a Jewish staffer was leaving one of the executive office buildings in the Capitol, a Senate building, and at a guard stand was a dog-eared copy of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And we know what happened and where it led to is the darkest day in human history, the darkest period. And we as a community continue to live through that, and with that cultural memory, and I'm going to rocket forward to today. And by rocketing forward to today, there is a specific mark in time when there became an uptick of anti-Semitism. It became normalized. And what happened in Charlottesville, it wasn't the start of anti-Semitism in our country, but it certainly added to the normalization. And again, that chant of Jews will not replace us. It wasn't these younger white men who were afraid they were going to lose their jobs to Jews. There was a Jewish conspiracy to bring brown and black people in to replace us in American society. And it started to normalize in truly abhorrent ways. It allowed what was down and something that would not be shared in any proper society. Now the Jewish community is being blamed for 9/11. Out there with graffiti, swastikas, SS. It's not something in the corners of society. You see things, again, if you look in the left-hand column with all the media companies, again, this sense that there's a Jewish control of the media. And then you see desecration of an Israeli flag. Now, those numbers, 14 and 88, are critical. 14 are the 14 words of white supremacists. We must ensure the existence of our race and a future for white children. 8. The 8th letter of our alphabet is H. H88 is Heil Hitler. These are tattoos now that people unabashedly will display. And again, part of why I share this with you is when these things are in front of your very eyes and you have this knowledge, there's something you can do about it, and I'll get to that in a bit. But it all comes from education. We at ADL believe data drives policy. And so as we see these things happen, we track the internet. We have a whole center on technology and society, which deals with social media companies. And again, unabashed anti-Semitism on social media, and it's not veiled. Although, if you don't know that HIAS is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, maybe you don't know that what that tweet says, that post says, is that we, the Jewish community, is contributing to immigrants being brought into our society to destroy our society. And what would the same gentleman, and I use that loosely, have to say is to start the ovens again. This is all happening in the open air. And so what we at ADL do is we track all of this. And by this, I mean we track anti-Semitic incidents. Since 1979, we have tracked anti-Semitic incidents which include harassment, vandalism, and assault. By doing it over time, we're also able to identify trend lines. Data drives policy. Data drives resources. Data drives things like hate crime legislation. So, while 2020 saw a slight tick down from 2019, 4 of the 5 worst years in the history of ADL study were the last 4 years. In California, over the 5-year period, a 40% uptick in anti-Semitic incidents. Now, one of the things that happens is they metastasize and they adjust to the times we're in. 2020, we were indoors. We were locked down. So the incidence of harassment increased. Thankfully, vandalism and assaults decreased, but again, we were all inside. And what we saw is these incidents all across our fine nation. California had the second most, to be expected given our Jewish population, but New York, Florida, very significant acts, incidents of assault, of anti-Semitism. Now, I do want to make a point that incidents do not mean crimes. I'll get to that in a moment, but it's an important distinction. What we saw, though, in these incidents was a dramatic increase in harassment of Jewish institutions, synagogues, community centers, schools. Now, why? How? Zoom. Here we are. I hope your synagogue did not experience a Zoom bomb, which means someone accessed something like this and took it over and starts screaming anti-Semitic statements or posts anti-Semitic creeds. It happened almost 200 times across our nation. And it's the modern way to attack. Again, anti-Semitism has a powerful ability to adapt. And we saw on our campuses. Now, again, because kids were not together, we saw a decrease in incidents at non-Jewish K through 12 schools. As society starts to open back up, we're concerned. Why? College campuses. Beginning 2020, we were seeing a surge in incidents on college campuses. Then we went into lockdown. We're coming out of this now, and we're being very proactive about it to the best of our abilities, because the evidence is clear. Data drives policy. And what we saw over the last year and a half since Corona happened is, again, we're being targeted because it incorporates all the conspiracy theories. It incorporates capitalistic conspiracy theories. When you see George Soros mentioned in the bottom left and the media, it's part of that age-old conspiracy. When you see the connections and the urging that you should, as you see here, if you have the bug, give a hug, spread the flu to every Jew. And so one of the things, and I think all of you know this all too well, is there's also a very powerful impact on our psyches. And so at the beginning of 2020, we at ADL, we did a poll, we did a survey. It's part of what we do. And so what we found in particular was that over the past 5 years, 63% of people said they had experienced or witnessed some form of an anti-Semitic incident over a 5-year period. And then May happened. The armed conflict between Israel and Hamas resulted in many ways something that ADL had never seen before, because not that anti-Semitism was new, but it had a new vehicle, one which we've been championing and railing against, which is social media. And as many of you experienced, or your children or grandchildren, particularly those who are self-identified as progressives, their very identity was torn apart, and in many ways still is being torn apart. This was a very difficult period. And so what happened? What happened online? Just as a snapshot. We looked at 1 week on Twitter. Over 17,000 tweets with some version of Hitler was right. A normalization that then translates into a doubling of year-to-year anti-Semitic incidents. And tragically, sadly, one of the most prominent occurred here in the streets of Los Angeles. Sushi Fumi on La Cienega, just north of Beverly, a place where many people I know have eaten. I've driven by countless times. On May 19th, a caravan of 10 to 15 vehicles, which had been driving throughout the West Side, menacing the West Side, carrying Palestinian flags, as is their First Amendment right, but with bullhorns, threatening people, throwing things, pulling up in front of Sushi Fumi, jumping out of the vehicle, and demanding, "Who's a Jew?" And there was a group of young Persian diners sitting there with one non-Jewish friend who came to their aid as they were all attacked. ADL, because in many ways we are the first responder when things happen, we did. We did because we have a direct working relationship with law enforcement, LAPD, a direct working relationship with the mayor's office, and we offered a $5,000 reward for the arrest and conviction. Part of the reason to do that is to ensure that every resource is put, and it, in many ways, no, in every way was. Within a few short days, 2 of the principal perpetrators were arrested, charged and bail and out on bail. And now it's in the hands of the DA's hate crime unit, a group of very skilled prosecutors. And the critical thing with hate crimes is they're message crimes to the community. And so with hate crimes, and what a hate crime is an enhancement to an underlying crime. So in this case, one of the perpetrators was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. And by having hate crime enhancements on top, it adds 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 more years to a potential sentence. And so we are going to continue to advocate for prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. But sadly, it was not isolated. Elsewhere in Los Angeles, in the upper left, is a picture of 2 boys, Orthodox boys, walking home on Shabbat, who were struck with paint guns. In the bottom left, New York, where there was assaults on the streets. I live in Pico Robertson neighborhood. There was a rock thrown through Pat's restaurant. This is on our streets in our city. And so what did that result in? And I think I'm telling something to all of you that you already know, is how do we feel? And so we did a SNAP survey, more limited in number, but of American Jews. And after the results of what happened after the violence in Israel, 3/4 of Jews polled were more worried about anti-Semitism now than before. 40% were more concerned about their personal safety, but what jumped out at me was while 63% had seen something over 5 years, 60% had seen something over just a couple weeks. And so what do we do in response? Now, to all of you who have the benefit of such a wonderful synagogue with all your learning opportunities and amazing clergy, you know a thing or two about anti-Semitism already. I know this. But part of what I've also come to realize is all of us need some basic tools to engage in conversation. Because screaming at people and saying, you should have done this, it's not ultimately gets us to where we need to be, all involved in this work. So as we all know, anti-Semitism is enduring. It is biblical. That concept of dual loyalty is in the Torah. And we do an annual survey. It's called the Global 100. It's the same set of questions we do over and over around the world. In this country, 24%, the last time we did the study, say Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the country they live in. 41% around the world. We also know that anti-Semitism it's adaptive. It responds to the challenges of the time. And it's done that in this case, whether it's what happened after the George Floyd murders, bringing in, again, George Soros to events in Minnesota. Anti-Semitism, it's a paradox. We can't win. ADL, sometimes we feel the same way. We're right in the middle. We're too nationalistic, we're unpatriotic. The Jewish community is too insular, but they're a threat to assimilation. We're capitalistic, we're socialistic. This is the grand paradox. And this conspiracy theory that I shared before is unique to the hatred, to Jew hatred, to anti-Semitism. It brings everything together. The media, the capitalism, and these persist. And part of it is sometimes people do know what they're saying, but sometimes they don't. When they bring in media or capitalism or a Rothschild. It also can be both ways, conscious and unconscious. So one of the interesting things is it also is a matter of how you respond in the moment. Because I'll give you a personal example. At one point in my career, I'm an attorney by training. I had almost a 30-year legal career. I was a mediator at one point, and I brought the parties into a room, got rid of the lawyers, didn't want them to mess things up. And I bring the two parties in, and I'm a younger man, and one of them says to the other, "You're not going to start Jewing me down, are you?" Now, that was overt. My role, and I went through it consciously in my time, was I was in a role as a mediator. Maybe he didn't know what he was saying. This isn't about me. I'm talking about it 15 years or more later. And I have to tell you, I got an email today from a senior lawyer at a major national law firm recounting basically the same kind of experience. Sometimes it's conscious and overt, sometimes it's unconscious and implicit. We've all experienced these things. So the question is what do we do? How do we call it out? It's also highly racialized. We all know this, even though this is a religion of choice. It's up to you. It's not how you were born. It's not based on race, but it's certainly used, just as it's used to be politicized. Left and right. And it hasn't stopped, needless to say, and it was on full display on January 6th. And it continues to be the challenge in many ways of the day because it's so express, it's so pervasive, being politicized. And that is one of my messages to all of you, is when you are out there in the community, as you hear people say, this party should do that party should do this. We don't have the luxury of being a lack of unity at this time, and certainly not of being politicized. And we certainly know the lethality. Again, who would have thought that we would have seen what we saw in Poway, in Pittsburgh, on the East Coast? And of course, it's not about the Jews. It's about often the anxieties of the time. And we have to be aware of that. It was some recent reporting that some comments by General Kelly from his time in the Trump White House. And some of the things he said about recurrence of themes in history. And my father of blessed memory was born on Kristallnacht. He was just lucky it was in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm lucky it was in Providence, Rhode Island. And so it's a reflection of the times, and we are in unsettled times. And to be very clear, ADL, we don't have a silver bullet. But what we do know is that we're the canary in the coal mine. What we do know is that we continue to urge, demand, educate allies, because as the canary in the coal mine, we're in many ways both the first and the last sign when hate overtakes. And so I want to enlist all of you in the fight. So one of the first things that we do and we talk about at ADL is, first, if you see it, call it out, speak up. And then when you do, share the facts. And I'm going to share this entire deck with all of you so you have some resources afterwards. Because it's facts, not hyperbole, not emotion, that allows us to have the strength of the battle we're in. And so when I say speak up, all of you have a voice. Companies have a voice. Social media is one of the places that's most important and is most challenging for where our voice can and need to be. In July of last year, ADL led, along with partners like Common Sense and NAACP, a pause, stop hate for profit on Facebook. What we urged, and we had not a single company lined up when we announced it in June, but by the end we had 1,200 companies, many multinationals, who took their advertising off Facebook for a month. Now, did it bring Facebook down? No. But what did happen is, several weeks later, after frankly years and years and years of ADL advocacy and others, ADL achieved the goal of Facebook reversing its policy, and finally, Holocaust denial was a form of hate speech banned from the site. A victory, an important one. Companies, people use their voice. Celebrities, in September,
Jeff, I think you're frozen.
but the group that did had almost 600 million followers. So as we all can speak up, whether it's on social media, directly now, as you engage with people on social media, think long and hard of whether it's worth it. Are those comments of goodwill or are they not? What's your goal? Now, if people are egregious and outrageous, please report them to social media companies. Is your one voice going to matter and immediately have it removed? No. But when there's an accumulation, we at ADL, we have a relationship directly with every one of these social media companies, including Facebook, who we criticize. Now, if you see something on the streets, you see an act of vandalism in progress, call law enforcement. Don't intervene. You might be able to document. First and foremost, call law enforcement, but please also report it to us. Why? The only way we can do that amazing audit of anti-Semitic incidents is with data. And then what we also ask is that you share facts. And I have a number of resources we're going to share with you and you'll have available to you, as you have through the synagogue and other resources, but share facts. This is what you should be telling your children and grandchildren too. It's very emotional, but share facts, use our resources. And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't share that for folks 35 to 50, we have an outstanding young leadership program. I'm 54, so I'm just out of being young, which is its own commentary on the Jewish community. But contact me, learn about it, become an empowered advocate, because ultimately we all need to show strength. And that's what this kind of evening is about. And so I just want to conclude with this. And I've thought about it a lot in these days, which is, and I have the Shekhinah on the back of my neck right now as I'm about to share it. At the end of the reading of each of the 5 books of the Torah, we all, as a community, we rise together. And we say the words, Hazak, Hazak, v'nitazek. Strong, strong, together we're strong. And that's what this Shabbat Nachamu is about. It's what the opportunities to speak and share with you are about. I'm happy to engage in conversation now, knowing I don't have all the answers or the silver bullet, but in every way which we can be of assistance, of good office, of this common fight, we need you. And I appreciate the opportunity to engage this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeff. We so appreciate your presentation and the data and expertise and knowledge that you shared with us, as well as advice about what to do moving forward. This is clearly on our minds, weighing heavy on us, and it's just so wonderful to hear some data and some information, to hear the amazing work that the ADL is doing to protect our community and other communities. So thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to be with our community.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Are there questions? I'm happy to answer questions, although I do also happy to go to my wife and Shabbos table when we get there, but let's make sure that we talk about the questions anyone might have.
I was sent a question that was that came up a couple times. Is there was in your presentation focus on white supremacy and anti-Semitism coming from the right, though you did mention that there is anti-Semitism on the right and left. And so a few participants were wondering, is there also anti-Semitism coming from the left? I mean, presumably there is, and we hear about it. And does the ADL focus on that? And where does that figure into the different groups that exhibit and carry out anti-Semitism?
I very much appreciate the question, and the answer is, unfortunately, there are rising anti-Semitism on both the right and the left. Now, when it comes to expressions of violent domestic extremism, it is almost entirely, not just a vast majority, almost entirely white, right-wing extremists. Some are militia, some are anti-government, all of whom who have some element at their core of anti-Semitism. Now, when it comes to the left, what we saw in May made very clear that there is a very troubling and rising narrative and an anti-Semitism in many quarters of the far left. Not all, but in many. And one of the challenges of the day for all of us is to navigate those waters, because part of that is to always educate where we can and bring people in. Part of the way we do that at ADL is we have a council, which didn't exist before, of all the leading civil rights organizations in town. So I bring people together from the African American community, from the Asian community, from the Latino community. So we're in conversation, as I was, frankly, about a month or so ago after the rise in anti-Semitism. And part of it is also to saying in different communities, we need your assistance. Let us provide education. And so it is an absolute concern in all quarters of society, but the violent expressions, and this is very deep research we do, is almost entirely from more right-wing extremists.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful to have that information. Another question coming up is, allyship, which you touched on in your response right now. And traditionally, there have been some communities that are seen as natural allies with the Jewish community. And a lot of people have commented on what seems like a deafening silence from groups that are speaking up against hatred of particular groups, except when it comes to hatred of the Jews. Where are our allies in that? So we're wondering if you can speak a little bit to that.
So I appreciate that question. We also, in the question, I prefer to focus on what we can do from here forward. Now, I know how a lot of people feel. I don't know everything. I don't know the whole community, but I do know that there was a feeling of where were our friends like we were there for others. And so what I have as a working hypothesis, which is always dangerous to share with so many of you when it's recorded and going to be shared. However, I think as a Jewish community, we've done a remarkable job of responding to the threats of the day all the way back to 1913 and since, which means we also have very mature organizations. We've been able to use our experiences, our expertise with other communities. For example, ADL, we are incredibly proud that we have helped to incubate what is now called the Asian Foundation, which is basically an Asian ADL. I was on the phone with the leaders of the organization today. We share our good offices because we've had so much painful experience developing them. And then that leads to, in certain respects, I think certain communities not realizing we needed the help. They thought we were able to protect ourselves because we're the ones helping them. And then the corollary is, I know for me personally, Jeff Abrams, and maybe it's true of many of you, we're not always great about asking for help. So as we go forward, I'm urging all of you to share with your allies, your natural allies, we do need your help. Be there for us. And that's the message I'm carrying out to the community with other groups right now. And it's something where we saw deafening silence as two, for examples. One, they're not deafening silence. We'll start. Some organizations said nothing. Some organizations said the wrong thing, which I see some questions populating about education in our city. And some organizations said too little. So what do I want to do now? Just like I'm doing with you. We're providing briefings all around town to corporations, entertainment companies, bar associations about Antisemitism 101, just like I shared with you. Because if we have the tools, they can stand up. So let me, if I can, Karen, Jackie, can you want me to address the educational world right now?
Yes, I just first want to say thank you so much for making those presentations to the organizations, and thank you so much for your very eloquent answer, because I hadn't really heard a satisfactory one until I just heard you now talking about, we need to ask for help, and also we have, thank God, established organizations and unity. We come together, thank God, as a community, and so people see us as strong, but we need to ask for that allyship. So thank you for that, and please, yes, do address these questions.
And we need to do that also, if I may add, in unity. And one of the challenges often in the Jewish community is a lot of disparate interests and organizations and startup organizations. It's very important right now that we be unified and we be organized.
Yes.
Now, one of those things and I saw the question just to finish off this, is our historical relationship with the African American community continues. I'm in deep partnership with the head of the Urban League here in town. We're working with various folks in the entertainment industry. Part of it is, again, education. My young leadership just did an event with the young leadership of the Urban League. Get to know people. That's actually the antidote. I'm absolutely 100% convinced that the antidote long-term is getting to know each other. Now, when it comes to our educational, what's going on in our City of Angels, first I want to applaud LAUSD and their unanimous resolution of their board. supporting all of their students and faculty, Jewish students and faculty, so that it's a safe place for Jewish students. There's over 600,000 students, I believe, in LAUSD. Even if only 5% are Jewish, that's 30,000 families, faculty. And so LAUSD rose to the occasion. I spoke to one board member yesterday. I'll be speaking to another next week, because one of the calls to action in that LAUSD resolution was the superintendent had 90 days to return with a plan by consulting with experts like the ADL. Mm. So we're very fortunate to be in partnership with the LA Unified School District. That's emblematic of ADL. We work where we can, and when we can't, when we work from the outside and advocate loudly. UTLA, which is the union that represents teachers in LAUSD, had a very troubling, upsetting resolution, proposed motion about a month or so ago. That was a creed. It was an attack on Israel, supporting BDS. It had no place within a teachers union. So at the end of May, my office, we wrote a very strong letter to UTLA. We then partnered with the Federation and others as families signed petitions. And again, the most impactful voice are the families who have kids at LAUSD. That's part of the being strategic. And what happened was, when those motions came to a vote in the 8 chapters that had the motion, it failed in 6 of the 8. Now, it passed in 2. The battle is not over, because there's a legislative session of the entire UTLA in September. And make no mistake, that is a battle to come. So we are addressing in our school districts, when it comes to, and I don't want to digress too much, but when the buzzword of critical race theory, or whether it's ethnic studies model curriculums or ethnic studies in general, we at ADL see value in ethnic studies. We have worked extraordinarily hard, including with the ethnic study model curriculum, to make sure that when there is ethnic study, it is not bias. It is not bias against the Jewish American experience. It is not bias against Israel. And that takes relationship. It takes an extraordinary amount of time and effort and expertise. LA Unified has their own curriculum, which is actually pretty good. Some of the other school districts, one by one, there are going to be challenges. And so as those events occur, and if some of you, for example, live in Thousand Oaks, I have a colleague who works in that area specifically. We are here to provide all the information, all of the background, all of the context and nuance that's so critical to all of this work. So again, we're here as a resource for that. So, Ken or Jackie, do we have any more questions? Or I Shalom Bayit, they're the 2 most important words of my entire life.
We are so appreciative of your time and want you to get to your Shabbat dinner. And I just want to thank you so much. There is one final question that's coming up, but I fear that it is so complicated. It's going to take, so why don't I just throw it out there, and maybe if there's a to be continued answer or something. And I also want to let people know that because we also have this question, Mr. Abrams has been kind enough, he has shared that PowerPoint, and we will send it out to our community after Shabbat. So thank you so much for sharing that PowerPoint. The question that is on a lot of people's minds is when we hear about like Ben and Jerry's and their decision, and when we hear about politicians speaking about BDS, and you talked about May when the conflict heightened tensions. Is it useful for us to think about positions on Israel and how that relates to anti-Semitism? Is it useful for us to think about the connection? Is it useful for us to separate it? How do we approach these issues, and how do we, move forward with
Sure.
those two? Thank you.
So you can't unlink them. However, well, it's true that what happens there impacts us here. Again, look what we saw on our streets. Look what we're seeing on social media. What we also have to keep in mind is that anti-Semitism existed before 1948. And so as we engage in these conversations, we at ADL are pro-Israel, but we're not an Israel advocacy organization. There are many other Israel advocacy organizations. So one of the keys to our work is, while being in favor of a two-state solution, Israel's right to defend itself, and many other policies, we feel it's critical to be able, because we feel it's critical to be able to address the connectivity, which is also part of the reason that we invest very heavily in, we have an office in Israel. What that office is focused on is social cohesion in Israel with the Jewish and Arab communities. We have an annual conference that is solely focused on social cohesion. We do work all around the world. It's connected. But what's so key is to unpack, and what I would urge, and maybe to end with this, and a valuable tool to all of you. Natan Sharansky has his 3 Ds of knowing when criticism of Israel crosses over into anti-Semitism. So first, demonization. If you're demonizing Israel, it's anti-Semitic. If you're delegitimizing Israel, it has no right to exist, it's anti-Semitic. If you're applying double and unique double standards, only in the world does Israel get questioned. I wonder what some of the practices of the ice cream company that shouldn't be named in some of the countries that really commit some atrocities. So when there's a double standard, when there's a delegitimization, when there's a demonization, that's a tool for when you know it crosses the line. But then you separate it out, unpack it. You're all teachers. You have your own limud, and then you build back. So those are my thoughts. But again, I don't have all the wisdom. We're going to share, and thank you for that opportunity to share our deck and my information. Be in touch. We're here to help.
Thank you.
And Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much. That was incredibly usefully informative, wonderful. And thank you to the ADL for the incredible work that you do. We're so grateful to you.
Thank you all.
Take care. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. All right, I'm going to leave. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye. Take care. And goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to say bye to everybody on the live stream, and Shabbat Shalom.